Good morning, boys and girls. Welcome to our lesson Unit 4, Historical Events in China, Part 1. And this lesson will be a combination of Lesson 1 and Lesson 2. Before we begin the lesson, there are certain reminders. The schedule of the day will be, first we'll recap Emperor Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of China, and you have if you have your GS textbook, refer to pages 22 and 23. Then we'll proceed to look at Emperor Wu of Han Dynasty. We'll also look at the Silk Road, the Jade Suit, and few of the inventions during the reign of Emperor Wu of Han. So this will correspond to workbook pages 24-25. And finally, as homework, you need to do a concept map about historical events in China, which I will talk about later. Let's recap some interesting facts about the first emperor of China, Qin Shi Huang. He became the emperor at the age of 13. He was the first emperor who conquered and who unified China. He was the first emperor. He ruled for a very short period of time, but he ruled a very significant dynasty. He was not a very popular leader. He is the first emperor who burnt books and buried scholars. He is the first one to standardize Chinese writing and unify measurements and currency. He is the leader who built the Great Wall of China. And also, he is the first emperor who has the biggest tomb in the history. The tomb is the Terracotta Warriors. For more interesting facts, look at the video below. From our first lesson, we learned that how Qin Shi Huang, he treated his people and how he ruled his empire. Now, if you look at picture number 2, you can see that the soldiers are burning books and they're burying all the scholars alive. Now we know the reason why he did that, because he didn't want the people to believe he didn't want the people to remember him as a cruel leader. He wanted everyone to remember him as a very good leader, so he just burnt all the literature and he burned the scholars alive. Now, picture 3, if you look at, we see a lady crying, and we know why the lady is crying there. It seems her husband had left for work to build the Great Wall of China, and she hadn't heard from her husband, and apparently her husband had died and nobody had informed her. And this story tells us what kind of atrocities the emperor did on his people, on the common people. And here again, like picture 1, you see someone like Jing Ke. There's a dagger and he wants to attack, and this was unfoiled because the emperor was not a very popular emperor and he wanted to conquer all the neighboring states, and because he wanted to unify China. So we did hear many stories in our last lesson, and before that, lesson 1. So we know what kind of a ruler Qin Shi Huang was. From the story, we can understand that Qin Shi Huang, he unified China. He wanted to become big, greatest emperor, so he conquered nearby 6 states and he unified China, made one big China, and he established his Qin dynasty. He also built the Great Wall, which is in Beijing now. And why did he build the Great Wall? Because he wanted to protect it from outside invasion. So he built the Great Wall in China. And below are the 3 stories, and there are many other stories associated with this ruler, like when Jing Ke, he unrolled the map and there was a dagger inside. Jing Ke wanted to kill him because he was going on conquering different states. And then books, he he burnt books and he buried scholars alive. And there's a story of also Meng Xiangnu who wept over the Great Wall. Now, from the slides before, we know the reason behind such incidents. Now, these were not the only key points that happened during his time. He also invented some very, very useful things, and some of the things are: he unified the Chinese characters, units of measurement, and currency. My question is, what are the units of measurement? I'm sure you know that. Units of measurements are, they used to measure length, capacity, volume, height, breadth. So what he did, he made it one similar, he made a standardized unit. Say for example, if a grocer, he used a steel yard of 12 taels for a kati, but a fruit, if you go buy a fruit, and if he's using a steel yard of 16 taels for a kati, what would happen? There'll be a lot of arguments, right? People will argue when buying and selling things. So it's very important to have a standardized measurements for the unit of measurements. That's one thing he did. And he also unified Chinese characters. Okay, here in the picture below, if you see, the Chinese character car is written in different shapes. Now, what would happen if we have all different characters, if each and every one of you are writing different Chinese characters, right? It'll be very difficult for people to read and understand what each other means, right? Communication will not be effective. So what he did, he unified all the Chinese characters and he said these are the characters for these words and we have to follow these standardized characters. He also did something very, very strange. It's called the Terracotta Tomb or Terracotta Warriors. Now, Qin Shi Huang's tomb, this is the tomb with terracotta warriors and horses. Now, Mrs. Desai has attached a video about what these terracotta warriors and what is the story behind these terracotta warriors. Please watch the video to have a full understanding of why these statues were put in a place, and they were there in a very how should I say it, in a very strategic, creative way. Because Qin Shi Huang, he thought that after he dies, if he goes to when he goes to the second world or the other world, he has to have the same kind of comfort and the same kind of luxury that he has here in his kingdom now. And that's the reason he had all the warriors, the horses, and the entire hierarchy to make his life comfortable in the other world. Qin Shi Huang is the first emperor who unified China. He built the Great Wall. He burned the books and buried the scholars alive. He unified the Chinese characters and the units of measurement and currency. All these had long-term effects on the future generations. Last week, the video that was posted had no sound, so my apologies. Please accept it, and we'll listen to the video again and we'll recap the points in lesson 2. We'll continue the lesson, and in today's lesson we'll look at Emperor Wu of Han. He formed the very famous Han Dynasty. There were certain policies carried out by Emperor Wu of Han. If you look at the pictures on your right, you can see 3 pictures. They are part of his very famous policies. And number 1, he promoted education and respected Confucius. Confucius was a big philosopher in China. So unlike Emperor Qin Shi Huang, who burned the books and he burned the scholars, you can see here Emperor Wu of Han, he promoted education. That means he respected knowledge, he respected books, and he also respected the Confucius theory. Number 2, he sent ambassadors to the Western regions, such as North Korea and Japan, to set up relations. He seems like a very friendly ruler, and he wants to have very good relation with his neighbors and other countries. So he sent ambassadors of peace to offer his good friendly support to them. And lastly, he opened up new land and drove away the Zhongzhou. The Zhongzhou, as you can see in the bottom right picture, are nomadic people. Nomadic means they don't have a permanent place to live. They travel from place to place, and they carry everything wherever they go. If you remember in our GS first or second lesson, we learned about the nomads in the Tibetan plain, like who live in one place in summer and they shift to another place in winter. The same way, these are nomadic people. They are illiterate, not educated, and they don't have a very civilized lifestyle. And during the rule of Emperor Wu of Han, the Han and Zhongzhou War, they fought many wars between the Chinese Han Empire and the Zhongzhou. And finally, the Han Empire, they were able to defeat them and drive them away from their land. The picture that you're looking at is a jade burial suit. Now, this is a funeral suit for the royal members of the Western Han dynasty. The picture shows the silk thread jade burial suit. The Chinese, for example, made jade burial suit for the imperial family, that means for rich family, for the royal family, and they prepared elaborate afterlife armors from pieces of jade because they thought jade had very special powers, and these pieces of jade were held together by gold or silver white thread. Now this ancient Chinese lavish costume, because they thought that these jade would give them greater power and it will guarantee them immortality to wearer, and as well as it will keep evil forces away. That means it will give them very good afterlife after their death. After their death, they will go to a very different afterlife. They'll have all the comforts and no evil forces will come to them. But of course, the bodies were all diminished over time, and only the jade suits protected the bones inside. Now, as time went by, jade is very expensive, and people could not afford so much jade, and so they started believing that such things were only mythological, they are not real. Emperor Wu of Han sent Zhang Quan to the western regions, Central Asia, and as far as Europe. A trade route, which was mainly for silk, was formed. It was called the Silk Road. The Silk Road began during the Han Dynasty in ancient China. It was not actually a road. It was not paved. It's not like our cemented roads or the highways. It was not even a single route. The Silk Road was a nickname given to any route that led across China to Rome. As you can see on the mirror, at one end is China and on the other you can see Rome. Each had something the other wanted. For example, Rome had gold and silver and precious gems. China had silk, tea, and spices. The Silk Road was important because not only goods were traded, the ideas and culture were carried by the traders as well. As you can see on the map, if you go from China, you cut across the Himalayas, that's India's, the Pamir, the Mur, that's the Persian culture, the Arabian, and the Roman Empire. So if there is a business person, if a traveler, if a businessman goes on this route, he meets so many different cultures, he sees so many different things, there are so many different beliefs, so these ideas gets traded as well. The Romans were not surprised to find another civilization hidden over the mountains. There is one very interesting story. Because the Romans were looking for the silk people. The Romans really loved the silk material, but they did not know where it came from. Now they discovered pieces of silk from people they conquered. But even those people from whom they got the material did not know where it came from because someone gave it to them. The Romans sent out people to find the makers, but never returned. Now, after the Silk Road, when the eagle, that's a sign of the Rome, finally met the dragon, of course we know that's the sign of China, they could find out who actually were the silk people, where actually the silk came from, and you can imagine how excited they were. Now, you can click on the link below to learn more about the silk trade or the silk route or the silk road. As you can see in the pictures below, there are you have the Emperor Wu's favorite sky horse, and other is a glass vase introduced into China from Rome. China did not have. It was from Rome. So these are the items that were traded along the Silk Route. Besides the Silk Route, the cultural exchange, ideas and beliefs were traded as well. Now, there were also other technological inventions during the Han Dynasty. Now, one was a seismometer, which is a big instrument you can see on the top right that detects earthquakes. We all know what earthquakes are. And this instrument helps detect if there is an earthquake. Now, also paper-making technology was improved. They are not the first one. It was there, but they improved the paper making technology and the finer paper were produced. Now, a copper water clock timer was invented. Wow, that's quite strange, isn't it? For a clock timer, a copper water clock timer was invented. Would really like to find out how this actually works. Let's recap last lesson. Last lesson was about the historical events in China, and we looked at the first emperor of China, the first emperor, Qin Shi Huang. He became emperor at the age of 13, and he did some very good things for China, such as he unified China. He unified 6 states of China and made a very greater China. He built the Great Wall of China. Why did he build the Great Wall of China? Mainly because he wanted to protect China from foreign invaders, and that's the reason he built the Great Wall. But was it really economical? Did it keep the foreigners away? Well, not really, but the Great Wall of China is still a very iconic structure, and it's a World Heritage Site. Next, he unified currencies and measurements. What did we learn in that context? We learned that he unified first the writing, because in Chinese language many different dialects have many different kind of writings, and what he did was to unify all different writing, and he had a common script for Chinese writing, so it's easier for people coming from different parts of China to read and write and to communicate because it has the same letters. He also unified measurements such as length, breadth, weight, everything. There was a standardized measurement system. So this was like unifying currencies, measurements. This unifying of all these things was a major boost to their economy. He did build the terracotta warrior tomb. the terracotta warrior tomb was built because he wanted, like as I explained in the last lesson, after death, when he goes to the new world or the other world, he wanted to have the same comforts of this world. So he built the entire underground terracotta warrior tomb. I'm sure all of you would have looked at the video and how elaborate that was. All the soldiers on horses and other men and everything else that he needs for his comfort in the other world. Now, one terrible thing that he did was he burnt all the books and he burnt alive the scholars. He burnt books means he wanted the history to know him as a very great leader, a good leader. He didn't want people to know like the atrocities, the way he punished his people. So that was one of the reasons for burning all books and the scholars alive. Before we end the lesson, let's conclude. After the founding of the Han Dynasty, Emperor Wu, what did he do? He promoted education, the teachings of Confucius. He also opened up new land. He established friendly relations with Western regions, and a route for foreign trade and cultural exchanges was worked out, which we call it as a Silk Road. And besides this, there are other technological inventions during his rule. Now, do you remember the 3 technological inventions that were made during the Han Dynasty?